The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds. Welcome to Sarah's Country. This is your home to delving into the matters that matter most to farming, food and fashion throughout this unique country that's made up of unique regions. And don't they create a beautiful puzzle that is Aotearoa New Zealand. Now, every region has its unique provenance story of people and place, from the culture and heritage of the way we farm and grow, and the individual climates that challenges, but also provides opportunities for the bold and the brave. I'm your host, Sarah Perkin, and it's the biggest privilege to be a part of the movement driving the way we think about change. Now, how we appreciate the wisdom of experience whilst appreciating the way we can see change is something that I look forward to being a part of on the journey towards the future of our food and fibre here in New Zealand. If COVID has taught us one thing, it's not the crisis, it's how we choose to deal with that crisis. Now, last night we had our own mini crisis with technical difficulties that were out of our control. Our producer Dan held himself beautifully. He tried everything in his power to navigate it, and we chose collectively to not worry about the pothole in the road of missing one show out of hundreds, and we made the call early to cancel. I do apologise, and we do appreciate your support on this as we picked ourselves up again, and we are here with you tonight. Of course, the first show back post-election result of Saturday night. Now, I want to only read out, and my thoughts are shared through the words of Farmers Weekly's editor Brian Gibson in yesterday's Daily Digest. That, of course, you can subscribe by visiting farmersweekly.co.nz. Now, I'm going to read this to you. It's titled Red Tsunami Hits Rural New Zealand. Now, Brian states the Labour Party now has a powerful mandate for the next 3 years after sweeping back to power on Saturday night. The result was perhaps not a surprise, but the margin of it was. Rural seats that have long been held by national strongholds turned red. There's talk that many in rural communities voted for Labour to increase its chances of governing alone without the help of the Greens. There's also talk that many younger people in the regions are simply not afraid of regulations for the likes of freshwater and greenhouse gases. Instead, they may see it simply the future of farming. Whatever the reason, and remember, COVID-19 certainly played its part, those working in the primary industries need to make some decisions. New Zealand has overwhelmingly supported a party that is committed to creating more sustainable farming through regulation. An argument against this journey simply can't be one. Too many everyday Kiwis are on board. It's time for our industry's leadership to show how we can thrive inside these new boundaries, rather than continue to try and break them down. They are Brian Gibson's words from yesterday's Daily Digest. Of course, as I said, you can subscribe on farmersweekly.co.nz. And I thought it was a way to be able to open up what is our future. However you're feeling about it, I would love to hear about it in the comments below wherever you're watching and joining Sarah's Country live. Tonight on the show, we have a theme of navigating our vulnerabilities together, whether it is our over-reliance on China to the freshwater regulations. To stand still is to go backwards, though. So for some chat in the comments, wherever you are watching on social media across multiple different platforms, I'd love to know, what do you fear about change? Is it okay to fear change? If so, what change is it okay to fear? Like getting old. I mean, I'm certainly noticing it. The old hangovers take a wee bit longer to recover from, and certainly the fear of losing your parents as you get older, and so many more things get closer and closer. But how do we manage fear? That's the biggest thing. And one of my favourite authors, Brené Brown, says vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. Now, I guess tonight will paint a picture along this theme from the great stories in this week's Farmers Weekly. After 7:20, Dairy Environment Leaders Forum's new chair and dairy farmer Melissa Slattery shares how farmers can approach increasing environmental and freshwater regulations. Towards 7:30, senior agri economist from Westpac New Zealand, Nathan Penny, discusses where New Zealand's most exposed in trading with China and how we can prepare better for that across all of our commodities. And to close the show, we're back to the Waikato with farm advisor Rob Macnab, who has been facilitating farm environment plans and says that farmers need to take this back into their own hands. But firstly, after this great video that we've had, because it is, sorry, that's later in the show. I do a great little video for you from another day that we celebrated last week. Firstly, after this break, 7:10, New Zealand Rural Land Company's plans to join the New Zealand Stock Exchange is going to give our retail mum and dad investors opportunities to get involved with purchasing farmland. The director of Rural Land Co, Christopher Swasbrook, will be on Sarah's Country with us very shortly. This is Sarah's Country.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits.
children,
chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help you farm,
Grow, milk, drench,
rear, come on in.
because we're out here too.
Well, from Newmarket to nightcaps, New Zealand retail investors are going to get the chance to buy into farmland when a New Zealand Rural Land Company's plans to join the NZX in December unfold. The company's plans to launch an initial public offering next month with intentions to raise between $75 and $150 million post its wholesale raise. And this will be to buy rural land, which it will then lease back to farmers. And the rural services company Allied Farmers thinks that this is a great idea, as they have signed a conditional agreement to pay $2.5 million for half of this New Zealand Rural Land Management Limited Partnership Company. This is an entity established to manage the Rural Land Company. Now, the rural sector has struggled to find a circuit breaker as banks have dialed back the availability of credit over the last couple of years and putting a roadblock in front of new entrants into buying and getting into farms. Now, one of the Rural Land Co-directors, Chris Swasbrook, is a long-term capital markets participant. And Chris joins us now. Welcome to Sarah's Country, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And, we haven't had many listings onto the NZX in the last 12 months. So, of course, there'll be a lot of hype around this one.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And we certainly hope so, and we've had very strong interest. We first took this to the market back in the middle of the year as a wholesale offer which means not to retail investors. So in simple terms, not in smaller parcel size. And we had a very, very strong response, and that forced us to consider accelerating the offer as we are now to a full listing on the stock exchange. That was always our intention, and we were going to do that next year, but we've brought that forward because the interest was so strong. And the interest is driven quite simply because we have a foreign buyer ban. And as you touched on, there has been a vacuum of credit to the sector, and that has created what we believe to be some wonderful buying opportunities. Because naturally, when the largest buyers are out of the market, and there is a vacuum of credit, there is an air pocket created, and we think that provides the opportunity for long-term investors to actually acquire high quality farmland. In our first instance, it will be dairy land because that is where the large scale opportunity is, at very attractive prices to what is seen in the past, what we've seen in the past. And what we've worked hard on for the past 2 years and what we are doing differently to what has gone before in the capital market sense, and I'm going back in time here to Tasman agriculture, is we have separated out the landowning from the actual on-farm operations, and we will lease this land to high-quality counterparties, farming counterparties, on a long-term 10-year basis with a right of renewal, so that those counterparties can expand their operations in a capital-efficient manner.
Oh, I have so many questions. And of course, it makes natural sense because the return on investment with the lowest interest rates in history. Of course, we have examples of my farm, but that is, like you've just said, the management and the ownership structure together in one entity, and a way of being able to lease it out rather than actually run these farms. However, when you're driving home return on investment to its shareholders of the ownership of this land, how does that stack up to make it attractive leases when there's so much uncertainty around on-farm regulations and the costs of running farms?
Well, I think that comes. The counterparties are not the counterparties are not oblivious to those factors and uncertainties. And a lot of regulation has come to the fore now, and is known. Yes, there is further potential regulation down the track, but what is known now is becoming factored into prices, in our opinion. And when we're talking about prices, we are talking about price declines from 2017. From 2017, when the market freely traded, the foreigners could buy, there was credit available. We are talking of prices down 25 to 35%. Now, at that price level, we can put in place a headline lease, a gross lease rate with a high quality operator or tenant at 4.5 minimum, 4.5% lease rate. Now, we have 25 basis points allocated to CapEx. We have 50 basis point management fee. Our management fee, I should say, is on net asset value, not on gross asset value. So we're not encouraged just to put debt into the company and acquire more assets. And then 25 basis points of just other costs of running a public company. I think as we get scale, those other costs come down over time. So that leads you to the investors in the underlying company, the New Zealand Rural Land Company, that owns the land. They will receive a 3.5% pre-tax dividend yield. Plus, on a long-term basis, it would be reasonable to expect some net tangible asset growth, some underlying asset value growth in the years ahead.
And mapping this out against price forecast for, milk price as well, and some of those ups and downs we've seen in terms of break even. If we hit, those troubled times of sub $4 again, and your leaseholders can't sort of make it work, does the models continue to stack up?
Yeah, it does, because that is factored into our model, because with our counterparties, one of the criteria is they must have 6 times the annual lease value of free equity on their balance sheet. So these are not small counterparties. These are operators with $50, $100 million plus balance sheets in their own right. They are what you would call in the industry large-scale operators. And why are they interested in doing it? Because they already have the platforms in place. They have the health and safety. They have the animal welfare programs. They have the environmental policies in place, and they can expand via leasing in a much more capital-efficient manner. And in a good milk price, the operators that we have in place under memorandum of understanding, we expect and we forecast that they can generate a mid-teen return on equity. So it's it's an attractive business proposition for them, and so this is very, very good for the industry, because in New Zealand we pay lip service to productivity. There's a different report on productivity all the time, up and down the country. But this is one way we can really drive productivity and capital efficiency into the agricultural sector, not just in dairying, but across the spectrum in the fullness of time. This is really significant for the industry because it provides equity at a vital time and will really improve capital efficiency within the sector.
Okay, let's talk about Allied Farmers' connection to that as well. One of the longest listed companies that has been around for some time, buying half into this. What's the strategic alliance and how will their network help with this venture?
Well, Allied Farmers, just as you said before, they have bought 50% of the management companies. So listed property vehicles typically have had in the past, and some do and some don't. They list the property company on the stock exchange, and they have an external manager. And so New Zealand Rural Land Company will be a listed property vehicle on the stock exchange. It will be what's known as a listed PI, a portfolio investment entity, which provides tax efficiency to underlying investors, and it's externally managed by New Zealand Rural Land Management. Allied Farmers has bought 50% of the manager, subject to a successful initial public offering, raising a minimum of $75 million. Now, the rationale for Allied Farmers is they had a stated goal of wanting to expand their operations across the rural sector. They were initially looking at expanding their livestock lending book, but this made a lot of sense for them to expand into funds management. And for us at New Zealand Rural Land Management, of course, it brought more agricultural expertise to the table. And so that's attractive for us. It obviously brings us another pool of investors that may well, because Allied has an existing shareholder base, so the Allied shareholders may well be interested in investing in New Zealand Rural Land Company. That is clearly a positive factor there in the future. But certainly it brings expertise to our table, and it brings expansion opportunities and the ability to raise additional capital for Allied. And what we are seeing at New Zealand Rural Land Company, and by virtue of that fact, New Zealand Rural Land Management, as we have had discussions with the sector more broadly, opportunities that wouldn't be appropriate for New Zealand Rural Land Company, which is just going to invest into rural land. There are other operating businesses, various agri-tech businesses that have been flagged to us that we thought could be quite interesting for New Zealand investors to have an opportunity to invest in. And I think my personal view is that is something that Allied Farmers, with new capital inside it, could look to try and fill the gap on, because that is the glaring omission on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and we've all talked about it for a long period of time. Agriculture is the backbone of New Zealand, even more so in a post-COVID world. And we cannot get exposure to it on the stock exchange. And this is a way to kill potentially two birds with one proverbial stone. You're going to have an opportunity to invest in just rural land, which will be attractive to a large number of people, in my opinion. And you also have an opportunity to invest into Allied Farmers, which manages that company, has a livestock business, has a small finance book at the moment, with the opportunity to invest elsewhere in the agricultural space.
Does this drive fear in terms of competition when Rural Land Co is sitting with its tender in against a mum and dad farmer in terms of having an open checkbook effectively to be buying up dairy farms around New Zealand? Should farmers be concerned around this competition flooding into the market at the moment, the rural real estate market?
Not at all, because the New Zealand Rural Land Company is looking at assets above $50 million in value. And that is where there is a vacuum of credit. It is hard to access $50 million to buy more dairy farms. Transactions, and you're seeing it in the sales data, transactions below $10 million are occurring because people can access, they've got a good balance sheet themselves, they want to bolt on the neighbouring farm. That is not our area of focus at all. We are not buying single farms and putting a one operator on that particular farm. Now, that's not to say if we had 10 farms in a cluster and the neighbouring 11th one came up, of course we would, if we were interested, we would look to buy that. But the assets that we are considering and have under review are certainly north of $50 million in size.
So the wording around bringing new entrants into the market, this is certainly about scaling up the already large farms and putting them in a better capital position to seek their future forward. Some of them majorly disrupted by the effects of M. bovis over the last couple of years and their credit perspective changing. Is this an opportunity to sweep in on the struggles of some of those larger farming operations?
I think when you look at lending to the dairy sector in aggregate approximately $40 billion, if you had to step down and said those assets or that lending that was distressed adds up to about $9 or $10 billion on the numbers that I know, and distress not in that they are bad assets, just that they have a troubled balance sheet, they have too much debt. And of course, we all know the capital changes that the Reserve Bank and the changes that have flown through the domestic banking sector, and that has in turn flowed on to restrictions of credit or a lack of credit to the sector. And really, that is what we are looking to restore equilibrium to. So people should not be fearful of the New Zealand Rural Land Company. People should be happy that the New Zealand Rural Land Company has seen the value that is inherent in the sector, looks at on a long-term basis and sees how attractive these assets are on an underlying earnings basis for the operators or our counterparties' tenants, however you would like to describe them, and that we want to invest, and fresh equity coming into the sector will only be positive in the long term on underlying land values, in my opinion. So that's positive for the sector.
Yeah. Well, the New Zealand Rural Land Company is seeking to acquire rural land at the moment, what is deemed a quality asset, a compelling buying in the current environment. So head to rural nzrlc.co.nz, and I'm sure there'll be some rural real estate agents wanting to take you to Eden Park at the moment, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Chris Swasbrook, who is a director of the New Zealand Rural Land Company that should be hitting its IPO on the New Zealand Stock Exchange towards the end of the year. Now, coming up after the break, we will hear how one Waikato farmer has stepped up to play a bigger role in helping farmers achieve their goals and meet these freshwater regulations. This is Sarah's Country.
Delicious. Ever wondered where it starts? Does it start with care? Respect. Fresh grass 365 days a year. The truth is, delicious doesn't start in a single moment or with a single ingredient. Delicious starts here.
Of your face like that. While Dan just sort of gets our next interview up, I have some great email feedback coming in from one of our regulars, actually. I do really love hearing from you, and you can email me as well, sarah@sarahscountry.com. What I love hearing is the topics that you do want to hear about. Suggest to me guests and topics, etc. I've got a few lined up that come through into into your DMs on social media. But this is from Brett. Brett follows actively every night, but he did have to send an apology in because, of course, he had to attend a Beef and Lamb North Island AGM the other night. This was last Wednesday. So his apologies. It's very sweet that you go out of your way there, Brett. I've got to say your shows are great for information and a bit of entertainment. Love it. It's become a fixture to our evenings, so tune in to follow the topics being covered. What I like about this email, it makes us think is Poruit, I think it is, which was the character out of an Agatha Christie, Order and Method and the Little Grey Cells. Anyway, so he goes on to say that we need to talk more about the rural transport sector at some point on the show, as the industry is facing some tough times and all the good efforts made to raising quality stock and produce have come undone as the transport network isn't up to scratch. As he points out, that Takaka Road over to Golden Bay is a really good example, as is the Manawatu Gorge Road debacle. Labour have come out strong, haven't they, Brett? It's all about infrastructure, think big Labour coming back in, and they have put some very big numbers about it. Will our rural roads come through and see this? Because, there's a shortage of good drivers, as he points out, and the government is not really pushing forward on this, and as he says, makes one's blood boil at some time. So, please send me through your thoughts in any topics and things that are on your mind and guests that you would like to have on Sarah's Country at any point in time, because, of course, we value your views, because Sarah's Country is about open hearts and open minds and what we are able to do to progress this country with this new government that is in a landslide by Labour, and we will continue for the next 3 years to hold them to a lot of their promises. Dan, can I get from you in my ear if we have our next guest lined up?
Yes, we do, Sarah.
Wonderful. And recorded earlier today is our next guest, Melissa Slattery. As farmers face increasing environmental and freshwater rules and regulations, one Waikato farmer has stepped up to play a bigger role in helping farmers achieve their goals and meet the regulations. Gerald Pickard reports in this week's Farmers Weekly how Dairy Environment Leaders Forum Chair Melissa Slattery wants to explore ways of getting its members to play more of an active role in the industry as these tighter regulations come into force around freshwater management. And Melissa joins us now. Evening, Melissa. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on to Sarah's Country. Now, can you just firstly set the scene for us around the journey that yourself and your husband Justin have been on at your Te Aro farm in the Waikato?
Oh, hi, good evening, and thanks for having me. So Justin and I started the journey at the bottom and went share milking. We've been across the country in Canterbury farming and have returned back to the Waikato. This is our fourth season back in Te Araha. It's where we grew up, and we love being here. So, we're really enjoying it back here, and love the challenge and opportunities that we've been presented along the way.
I'd love to know what learnings you took from dairy farming in Canterbury around regulations and farm environment plans, and what the farm was like when you took it over 3 years ago, and how much work was to do, but that experience that you brought from the likes of Canterbury.
Yeah, so through Canterbury to irrigate, we had a consent and a farm environment plan that we were audited against as part of that consent condition, and the regulations around that are largely different than how where we are in the Waikato for the infrastructure and the way that farming takes place. But in Te Araha, in the Waikato, the farm that we bought has had a lot of potential, and we could see the potential, and we've been working on improving the farm ever since we've got here. So it's been a great challenge and an awesome opportunity at the same time.
I started opening the show with a little part from our editor at Farmers Weekly, and he said that for our industry to thrive, we need to work out how to do that inside of these new boundaries, as opposed to being defensive and fight them. How have you and your husband, and then we're going to get on to the wider forum, being able to accept that challenge and really start to drive change as opposed to defend it?
So we see like our investment in farming is very long term, and part of that long term vision, we have sustainability and farming practice at the fore. So we're always wanting to learn how we can run our farm within the regulations and where these regulations may take us in the future, so that we can continue to farm and achieve efficiencies around how we farm, and to keep relevant for our future, and also understand where consumers are going with where they want us to farm as well. So keep learning and growing as much as we can.
And you've just taken over the position as chair in the Dairy Environment Leaders Forum from Matamata dairy farmer Tracy Brown, who has publicly fronted a lot of dairy campaigns in mainstream media as well. How do you believe this particular forum and group of dairy industry leaders that from a farm level can actually start to have some approach and a voice when it comes to these regulations on a regional level starting to wash out and come into force?
So we have these national level standards through government, especially in the last year, and it's really crucial for us to work with, at a regional level, how they implement these through councils and how they interpret the national standards, and how we can help create a practical voice for how these are implemented on farm. There's also catchment groups. There's a lot of good studies and information happening on farm, and a lot of dairy environment leaders are taking those challenges on themselves. So we're also going to have the forums and continue to build on those connections with key policy and just keep that motivation going. So
How do you believe that we can actually work within these regulations when a lot of farmers already have farm environment plans, yet the way that these national freshwater policies statements have come out and standards have come out seem extremely impractical to a lot of farmers, and particularly a lot of anger in the Southland area, where each individual region has its own unique challenges. What are the collective dairy environment leaders around the country doing to support each other when they have their own unique challenges?
Well, that's exactly it. We are there to support each other, and every different region has its challenges that they explicitly know, and they run on the farms. They know those challenges. They have that practical knowledge. So it's about communicating how that plays out in terms of regulation, and keeping those conversations going to achieve those, closing those gaps between what might seem impractical and how we can move forward. So there's great people in Southland and dairy environment leaders that are actively involved in that space.
What is your parting advice to those listening and watching To Serious Country who want to actively get in their community more involved and be less fearful of rules, and actually seek to support each other around the learning of how we're going to be able to achieve these challenges collectively?
I feel that, as farmers in generations, we've always had our challenges, and we've always managed to adapt and innovate to meet new challenges. There's a lot of good resources coming out there. Dairy NZ has a number of events coming up to get to know your numbers around emissions and things like that. This Dairy NZ Dairy Environment Leaders Group is also a great way to build connections and have those conversations. Also, be courageous, be bold, and be prepared to have, conversations and step outside your comfort zone and talk about these things. We're all learning, we're all on the journey, and we're all going to get to a good space. So I just motivate everyone to, we can do this, and we will do this, and we do have good people backing us. So yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Dairy Environment Leaders Forum's new chair and Waikato dairy farmer Melissa Slattery. It was International Rural Women's Day over the last week, actually, and we have a great video coming up. But I do want to utilise this opportunity to celebrate every wonderful rural woman around this beautiful country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, who contribute tremendously to community events and what they do for their families and their whānau and their wider communities. Thank you so much. And this is a belated celebration of International Rural Women's Day. And what a lovely way to finish off the back of Melissa there. What an inspiration she is. And of course, her husband Justin farming in Te Aroha in the Waikato. So there has been circulating on social media. I did find this video really great, a way to acknowledge every one of those beautiful rural women. Thank you so much to Ravensdown for putting this together. And after this, we're going to be joined by Nathan Penny, Senior agri economist at Westpac. This is Sarah's Country.
Really pleased we got into this. Thanks for your help, Dave.
It's a good idea, honey. You reckon it'll come out?
Cover it in talcum powder, leave it 10 minutes, you'll be fine.
Good call, Dave.
Good call on getting those security cameras, Dave.
You call a new one yet?
Yeah, kind of.
When you've got decisions to make, we'll be there to help you make the right call.
I'd go for those ones, Bob. Yeah, good call.
Did you choose these?
Oh,
For great advice and insurance, talk to FMG.
Working in the rural sector is awesome. It means I can help the farmers in my community achieve their farming goals.
I get to meet some great people, I get to go to some fantastic places, and I get to help farmers achieve their goals by helping them to farm smarter.
Proudly producing some of the most sustainable red meat protein in the world, all while taking the utmost care of our precious environment.
It makes me so happy. We get to export our beautiful meats and our beautiful wool fibres, not only to all around the world, but within New Zealand. And it's such a cool industry to be a part of.
To build strong and resilient businesses so that our mokopuna can thrive in the directions that they choose to head and are proud of this beautiful country that we live in.
To me, working in the ag sector means connection. Everything we do is connected with the land, whether it be our families, our finances, our diversification projects, or our code of ethics. It comes with many challenges, responsibilities, and lots of learning, but also comes with reward, opportunity, fulfilment, and lots of pride. We wouldn't have it any other way.
We know that China is big and its market is highly profitable. But it is unsurprising that New Zealand exporters have tapped heavily into this market since New Zealand signed that China Free Trade Agreement back in 2018. China is now comfortably our largest export market, accounting for the largest share of our exports in all but a few sectors. Nathan Penny joins us now, Westpac's senior agri economist. This is all coming out of the economic bulletin of late, Nathan. What is that main message that you're trying to send there around how China has actually gone and restricted access to some lucrative markets because this is a strategic direction for China, and why should New Zealand be worried?
Yeah, hi Sarah. I mean, it's a really good question. It's probably the question I get asked the most when I talk to farmers in the regions. Are we too heavily reliant on China? So that's sort of the sort of my attempt in the last little while to answer that question for farmers. And it is a question of how much are we sending, what share are we sending of a particular export to China, but also how much they rely on us. So it's sort of a two-way thing. And there are some sectors where China is reliant on us to a degree, and those sectors we think are less vulnerable to a change in tune from China, whereas there are other sectors which are quite vulnerable should they decide to do things differently with us, like they have recently with Australia and Australia's coal exports to China.
I'm looking here at a bit of a graph that you've created around this exposure risk based on the export sector. Tourism, seafood, kiwi fruit, very high risk that China is exposed to New Zealand. Yet wine right down there, because obviously as that middle class is developing. How are our sectors individually trying to insulate that risk for them? And what is China going to do to be able to ensure that it's not at risk as well?
Yeah, a couple of questions in there, isn't there, Sarah? I guess the first thing is to note something like wine is actually just not exposed because we don't sell much wine to China. They're not big wine drinkers, so it doesn't really matter. Whereas, we do get a lot of tourists from China. And just to understand why is that sector at risk? Well, simply because Chinese tourists can go to any number of destinations. And they don't need to come to New Zealand. They could go to Thailand, they could go to Italy, they could go anywhere just about and not really worry about coming here instead. So if the Chinese government were to change its tune, like I said, it could basically prevent all Chinese tourists from coming here. And it's a similar thing with something like seafood and gold kiwi fruit. There's such a small, we're such a small player in those markets. So for kiwi fruit, it's in the broader fruit market. We're so small. Apples, but in particular bananas and pineapples are much, much bigger. So China again could just easily switch out of kiwi fruit into those other markets, and that would be one way if they wanted to. They could hurt us if they decided that was in their strategic interests.
And we're talking about this as well in regards to dairy. In this week's Farmers Weekly, the dairy forecast is skewed, and there is a great array that Nigel Sterling's put together of commentators on this. But you're saying that last year New Zealand accounted for over half of China's dairy imports, and that the Chinese dairy farmers are struggling to compete with us.
That's right. I mean, the key thing there, so we've mentioned tourism and seafood and kiwi fruit as being having high exposure risk, whereas dairy is different. It's because China is quite reliant on New Zealand for its dairy imports. As you said, about half of the imports come from New Zealand. And while they do produce their own dairy, they are not competitive. Their costs of production are well north of ours. Somewhere. There's lots of anecdotes out there, but it's at least $10 a kilo to produce milk in China. So really, if they can, they'd probably prefer to get it from here, and that's why, in a way, the proof is in the pudding. They've got companies like Yili and the owners of Synlait have set up shop here because they can access cheaper milk and more reliable milk as well. Let's not forget that Chinese milk at times has been not safe to consume. So not just the amount, but also the reliability of our supply coming from New Zealand, and also the competitiveness of the supply coming from New Zealand. So, taking all those factors into account, China will still tend to rely on New Zealand dairy, and therefore our risk into that Chinese market is lower for dairy.
It's not just dairy from your economic report. China's also extremely reliant on New Zealand for logs as well.
That's right, yeah. And so, China is a massive market for forestry, and mainly we send logs there. We see that as slightly higher risk than dairy, and the main reason there is there are a few substitutes for China to choose from. So they can go to Europe Russia and North America to a degree. And so while we are a big, we do account for a lot of China's imports, there are some choices for China. So if they were to choose to strategically put some barriers in place for our log exports, that could hurt us, but it also would hurt them at the same time. So hence medium risk, we've classified forestry as.
Oh, thank you so much. Nathan Penny's joining us there from Westpac as the agri economist, and this is following the latest economic bulletin entitled New Zealand's Exports to China, Where is New Zealand Most Exposed? It's a really great read. Actually, I'm sitting there scanning through it, and there's a lot more depth in that detail. Now, coming up after the break to close the show, we're going to be joined by Waikato rural consultant Rob Macnab as we continue this conversation tonight about the regulations are coming down. We know who the government is. We understand some of the parameters around what this freshwater regulation is. So what is Rob's advice from all of the workshops that he has facilitated and working with farmers to gain that confidence into this next 3 years ahead? Rob will be with us very shortly. This is Sarah's Country.
Growing a better world takes courage. It takes foresight and vision. It's about dreaming big, then being brave enough to follow that dream through. To create a world where food is plentiful, soils are healthy, and rivers run crystal clear. A world where we grow more with less, where livestock is tended to with care. Energy is friend, not foe, and waste is a valuable resource. This is the world you're already shaping through imagination, innovation, and determination. So as small steps become huge leaps, you move boldly forward. And Rabobank is there beside you to help grow a better world together.
Even when everything changes, some things will always stay the same. The cows still need milking, the economy still needs dairy, and dairy farmers will always have what it takes. Whatever you need to keep milking, our job during the lockdown is to get it to you, because we know what it takes.
You lot are very quiet in the comments tonight, but that's okay, because I know that some of you just like to enjoy to sit back with the iPad next to the fire, or of course on the big smart TV, and just consume, and that's okay. Well, it's probably because you don't want to tell me about what you're most fearful of live in front of everyone. Fair enough, absolutely. Of course, we just sort of brought up the topics about aging and getting old. Come on, what are some of the good things about getting old? Please tell me. I've got so much to look forward to, I know. And there is so much treasure, like having grandchildren and handing them back. I'm sure that would be absolutely amazing. Now, I do have one comment. Of course, our trusty John Williams. Good to see you there in the comments, John. He said, great, I didn't miss anything. And this is, of course, with relevance to last night's show. Sadly, we had to cancel it. I'm so sorry about that, technical difficulties. But we're here tonight. But you know what you didn't miss, John, and I know you wouldn't have missed it, was that All Blacks game on Sunday. How much is that Caleb Clark? You look up and go, you feel like you've got deja vu watching young John Alomu. I mean, I'm not going to get into me breaking down, minute by minute of that game because, of course, it's not my specialty. But I looked up and went, whoa, what have we got here? And absolutely incredible. I can't wait to follow his progress. And just to see Ronnie Clark's face there as they panned around to him, you could see by about the third time, he's like, go away. It's about my son and about the game. But what a wonderful game it was. So, and John, I know you would have been there. Now, on the front page of this week's Farmers Weekly, Richard Rennie reported that there is a need for farm environment plans, and we know that it's confirmed within the freshwater regulations. A lot of farmers are already doing farm environment plans, and these are sporadic across different councils who have brought them in at different times. I know here the Environment Canterbury was certainly early to that piece. Farmers are casting about a crowded market for what constitutes a definitive template, and I think that's the biggest key, that there has been a start, but there hasn't been guidance around this. Waikato Farm Advisor Rob Macnab has been working very closely with the King Country River Care. You may have remembered Anna Nelson. She was on Sarah's Country, talking about how they have been actively working and facilitating these farm environment plan workshops together. It's all about the catchment-driven approach, isn't it, to define what is going to be this plan development. And it's going to be something we constantly talk here on Sarah's Country. And Rob joins us now to continue this conversation. Rob, welcome to Sarah's Country. Firstly, thank you. How confident are you that these farm environment plans are on the right track to start to be defined to be a national template, this single integrated plan that Minister Damien O'Connor wants to see happen?
Well, one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence here is the ability and the capability of the farmers themselves to contribute to these farm environment plans. And Anna Nelson would back that up completely. And we've seen throughout the wool sheds and the country halls, through Pew and Aria and the King Country, about farmers creating their own farm environment plans that are unique to their farms and they're unique to the challenges that they have on their farms. So in the absence of a template at the moment, farmers are creating their own templates or own visions of how they're going to manage their farm resources, and it's coming out fantastically well.
That's excellent. It's taking the bull by the horns in something that I suppose the basis of it. So if you could actually talk our audience through, when you actually do start to pull it together, when they do define what that template so looks like on a national scale, it will just be putting the edges around. The core foundation is something that everybody can start to get their head around early, right?
Exactly, Sarah, and that's what I'm really encouraging farmers. We do know what some of the critical components are going to be in the farm environment plan. We do know that it's going to be a map-based, and we do know that we're going to break it into land management units or blocks of the farms. We then know that we have to detail our management to overcome our strengths and weaknesses, and then we're going to develop some action plans to remediate or to mitigate the things that we can't manage by farm systems alone. And once farmers get their heads around that process, it's pretty hard to stop them going at it.
It is hard, though, because there's a couple of points you brought up there. The mapping. Let's talk about mapping. When you've got a rule like a 10-degree slope, which really is sat there from the beehive being calculated out on a computer, doesn't stack up. And then you've got a government that's showing that it will bend the rules after they've just released it. It must be frustrating to sit down and do all that work, yet it potentially could change.
It is frustrating, and I do get the frustration coming back from our farmer attendees. But once we sit down and say, well, what's it like on your farm? What do you think is important on your farm? Those frustrations quickly dissipate because they're telling their story, they're telling their challenges, and they're telling their story about how they've overcome them. So yes, while it is frustrating, and that's just one instance of probably many that we're going to face, but we just need to put it back into the farmer's hands and say, what do you need to do on your farm? And I've yet to meet a farmer who has said, no, I'm not going to do anything. They all are up for the challenge.
What about economically when it comes to wintering stock?
Mm-hmm. That's a real challenge, and I'm not going to pretend, and I'm not going to hide from the fact, because within our own business unit, we've got a dairy farm down in Otago, so we're going to be directly affected by it, and we can't hide from it, and we are going to have to face that. We're going to have to build it into our farm production systems. In the North Island, we are a little bit more flexible around some of those things, and we're already seeing a shift to move away from those sorts of practices anyway. But yes, that's one of the rules we say of farm environment plans, is that to overcome a challenge, there may well be some negative outcomes.
This is the thing, because of supplementary feed, cut and carry, and of course the importation of palm kernel being an alternative.
Which obviously isn't going to help us out with our greenhouse gas components, is it? So, and that's right. And whilst the challenges and while the answers aren't right in front of us right now, I'm seeing some fantastically creative solutions that are being tried. I'm not going to say they'll all succeed, but they are being tried, and I back them to try it every time. So I think in the passage of time, we will begin to see farmers creating the solutions that are needed. Some of those ones that you mentioned, like the winter grazing and the resowing, they look like insurmountable challenges. But I was speaking to a guy that marched on Parliament in 1987 when the subsidies were removed, and he said it was an insurmountable challenge, and he farms one of the most beautiful farms in the Waikato now.
It's how we see it and our attitude that we bring to the table. I absolutely agree. But you also brought up there just before about how we deal with adverse weather events. That's something that's out of our control and something that's changing dramatically.
Yep. And farmers are very much in tune with the weather, and they farm for the best year, but they plan for the worst. And so that's one of the things that we're now building into farm environment plans is our adverse weather planning. And that's been really cool and a lot of fun, to be fair, to be part of it, seeing the innovative solution that people come up. Like there's one farmer in the King Country with 10 bull units. Well, he's got 10 solar panels sitting in his shed. So if his power goes out for a week, they get plugged in straight away. Just small little things like that are going to make a huge difference. And he puffs his chest out with pride and reckons he solved some of those things.
I think he'd be an FMG pin-up boy.
I don't know about that. I will mention it to him, to be fair. But no, it's and that's where I think when we come back to the farm plan, I think that we've got to move away from it just being a compliance tool, but a really good business continuity tool. And when farmers approach it in that way, that's when we get the really good stuff coming into the farm plans. Write them for our benefit, not for the regulators' benefit.
I love that, absolutely. For all of those that are watching, that are actively involved in catchment groups across this country who are really struggling to get 100% buy-in from their farming communities, what's your advice?
My advice is patience and persistence and perseverance. And in fact, I was in South Auckland today with a catchment group just like that is at far-flung edges, forgotten by everybody. And I have absolute confidence within 5 to 10 years, they will take everybody along with them. They will take along the market gardeners, they'll take along the maize growers, the dairy farmers, they'll all come on board. It's patience and persistence and actually in belief in what you're doing is actually the right thing. And you know it's the right thing. So just stick at it and people will come round.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Rob Macnab is a farm advisor with Total Ag and, of course, front page of this week's Farmers Weekly entitled Farm Environment Plan Sourcing Challenged. And that just cements everything that I continuously say, that farming is actually an emotional game. there is so much emotion to all of our decisions and why we do what we do. And when we learn to harness these emotions, we certainly can do a better job of that. And that's why we opened up talking about fear of change, vulnerability, all of these things. Oh, Sarah, shush. But it's true. And I want to end the show to those watching live to tune in to TV1 at 8:30 very shortly to watch Man Enough with Matt Chisholm talking about male mental health. I do have to give a shout out because my sister Ali does feature, as well as some incredible rural farmers talking on this awesome show. I can't wait to turn these lights off and go and turn the telly on behind me and sit down and watch. You've been an absolute pleasure to have with, even though you've been a wee bit quiet. Oh, no, I've got a few coming through. I do need to acknowledge. Brett has a fear of falling. Fell on a rock climb at Outward Bound and a Kiwi when he was 19 and never got over it. That sounds terrible, Brett. So he does test heights. Fair enough. Michael Ross is flat out. New regulations are a signal that we need to change the way we manage the land that we are guardians of. That is a huge positive opportunity to manage better. The plans are opportunities to improve and tools farmers need to help them manage, then manage performance. Farmers already know what should be done. Don't wait. Great advice. Thank you so much there to Michael and to our regulars that follow along. On podcast, on demand, live at 5 o'clock in the morning. They go live. Make sure you share with your family and friends the great little bite-sized interviews that you can take with you on the road wherever you are around this beautiful paradise we call New Zealand. Thank you so much to the team at Farmers Weekly that we can produce this show in alliance with. We wouldn't be able to do it without you and the experienced agricultural journalists and analysts that bring the great in-depth journalism to the paper and extended through Sarah's Country. Get in touch, Sarah, at sarahscountry.com at any time. And in the meantime, good night, go well, and we will see you again at 7 p.m. live tomorrow night. This is Sarah's Country.